Hello and welcome back to the novel study of The Phantom Tollbooth. Today we are doing Chapter 5. And Chapter 5 is called Short Shrift. So we should talk about that right off the bat. Short shrift is an idiom. It's something that you do to somebody or something that does to you. There are two definitions, two meanings of this idiom. The first one is barely adequate time for confession before an execution. But the second definition is the one we're concerned with today, and that is little or no attention or consideration. So if I had something I needed to move out of my apartment, something heavy like an old couch, and I asked my best friend, could you help me move the couch? And maybe my best friend didn't really want to be bothered doing that. So the best friend made up an excuse. Oh, I have to take my wife to the movies that afternoon. Well, that friend would have short shrifted me, did not give me attention or consideration when I needed it. And then the other definition of short shrift is to make quick work of something, which just means to deal with something very quickly and to not want to be bothered with it, so you just deal with it very quickly. We're going to find out, as we know, this book always takes an idiom and makes it literal. So let's see how they take the idiom short shrift and make it literal. Before we begin Chapter 5, we remember that Chapter 4 ended with a cliffhanger where there was the fight between the spelling bee and the humbug, and all of the stalls got knocked over and all of the words and letters scrambled in a giant mess all over the place. And this is where Chapter 5 picks up. Ready? "Done what you've looked!" angrily shouted one of the salesmen. He meant to say, "Look what you've done," but the words had gotten so hopelessly mixed up that no one could make any sense at all. "Do going to we what are," complained another, as everyone set about straightening things up as well as they could. For several minutes no one spoke an understandable sentence, which added greatly to the confusion. As soon as possible, however, the stalls were righted and the words swept into one large pile for sorting. The spelling bee, who was quite upset by the whole affair, had flown off in a huff, and just as Milo got to his feet, the entire police force of Dictionopolis appeared, loudly blowing his whistle. "Now we'll get to the bottom of this," he heard someone say. "Here comes Officer Shrift." Let's take a pause and look at that last line. The entire police force of Dictionopolis appeared, blowing his whistle. So if it says, it's either a mistake in the text between a singular and a plural, or what else can we infer by that line? Well, if there's only one person in a policeman uniform running up and it says it's the entire police force, he must be the only police officer in Dictionopolis. Striding across the square was the shortest policeman Milo had ever seen. He was scarcely 2 feet tall and almost twice as wide, and he wore a blue uniform with white belt and gloves, a peaked cap, and a very fierce expression. He continued blowing the whistle until his face was beet red, stopping only long enough to shout, "You're guilty! You're guilty!" at everyone he passed. "I've never seen anyone so guilty," he said as he reached Milo. Then, turning towards Tok, who was still ringing loudly, he said, "Turn off that dog! It's disrespectful to sound your alarm in the presence of a policeman." He made a careful note of that in his black book and strode up and down, his hands clasped behind his back, surveying, which means observing, the wreckage in the marketplace. Very pretty," he scowled. "Who's responsible for all this? Speak up, or I'll arrest the lot of you." There was a long silence, since hardly anybody had actually seen what had happened. No one spoke. Now let's take a pause and talk about two things, one thing that is small and one thing that is big. The small thing is all the way back up to the paragraph that says striding across the square. A couple sentences down, he continued blowing the whistle until his face was beet red. Notice it's B-E-E-T. His face was not beet till it was red. B-E-E-T is the vegetable beet, which is a dark reddish purplish color, and that's the color of his face. Back up to the paragraph, striding across the square was the shortest policeman Milo had ever seen. Well, if his name is Officer Shrift and the title of the chapter is Short Shrift, which we know is an idiom, then we can see that the author took short shrift and made it literal by having a very tiny 2-foot tall policeman who is 4 feet wide. And that's why he's Officer Short Shrift. "You," said the policeman, pointing an accusing finger at the humbug, who was brushing himself off and straightening his hat. "You look suspicious to me." Suspicious is a vocabulary word. It just basically means that you believe somebody to be guilty of something, but you really don't have the proof. The startled humbug dropped his cane and nervously replied, "Let me assure you, sir, on my honor as a gentleman, that I was merely an innocent bystander, minding my own business, enjoying the stimulating sights and sounds of the world of commerce," which is trade, "when this young lad—" "Aha!" interrupted Officer Shrift, making another note in his little book. "Just as I thought. Boys are the cause of everything." "Pardon me," insisted the humbug, "but I in no way meant to imply that—" "Silence!" thundered the policeman, pulling himself up to full height and glaring menacingly at the terrified bug. "And now," he continued, speaking to Milo, "where were you on the night of July 27th? "What does that have to do with it?" asked Milo. "It's my birthday, that's what," said the policeman as he entered "Forgot my birthday" in his little book. "Boys are always forgetting people's birthdays. You have committed the following crimes," he continued: "having a dog with an unauthorized alarm, sowing confusion, upsetting the apple cart, wreaking havoc, and mincing words." Let's pause. Wreaking havoc, which is basically creating destruction everywhere, and havoc is one of your vocabulary words. It's just great destruction or devastation, ruinous damage, havoc. And mincing words is an idiom that you need to know for the quiz. When somebody minces words, it means that they are speaking vaguely, generally, or indirectly. They're not being specific. They're not getting to the real point. And maybe they're concealing something. They're mincing words. Mincing means chopping into little bits. So make sure you know that vocabulary word and that idiom for the quiz. "Now, see here," growled Tuck angrily. "And illegal barking," he added, frowning at the watchdog. "It's against the law to bark without using the barking meter. Are you ready to be sentenced?" "Only a judge can sentence you," said Milo, who remembered reading that in one of his school books. "Good point," replied the policeman, taking off his cap and putting on a long black robe. "I am also the judge. Now, would you like a long or a short sentence?" Short one, if you please," said Milo. "Good," said the judge, rapping his gavel 3 times. "I always have trouble remembering the long ones. How about I am? That's the shortest sentence I know." Now this is a good time to discuss something that I only had up on the screen for one of the last chapters, and that is a pun. A pun is not the same as an idiom. A pun is a joke exploiting, which means taking advantage of, the different possible meanings of a word, or the fact that there are words which sound alike but have different meanings. And puns used to be extremely popular, like the highest form of comedy. Shakespeare was all about puns, and you're going to find tons more puns coming up in this book. Everyone agreed that it was a very fair sentence, And the judge continued,
"There will also be a small additional penalty of 6 million years in prison. Case closed,"
he pronounced, rapping his gavel again.
"Come with me, I'll take you to the dungeon."
"Only a jailer can put you in prison," offered Milo, quoting the same book.
"Good point,"
said the judge, removing his robe and taking out a large bunch of keys.
"I am also the jailer."
And with that, he led them away. Let's take a pause there. And did you catch the next pun? Sentence and sentence. So when you have a sentence, you have a set of words that is complete in and of itself that you write. You write a sentence, but you can also have a sentence that is the punishment assigned to a defendant found guilty by a court. Or as a verb, you can sentence somebody. A judge sentences somebody by giving them a consequence or a punishment. So that is a pun on the fact that sentence has two meanings.
"Keep your chin up,"
shouted the humbug. Now, keep your chin up is an idiom, which just means remain cheerful in difficult circumstances.
"Maybe they'll take 1,000,000 years off for good behavior."
The heavy prison doors swung back slowly, and Milo and Tok followed Officer Shrift down a long corridor lit by an occasional flickering candle. Corridor is one of your vocabulary words, and it's just a long hallway.
"Watch the steps,"
advised the policeman as they started down a steep circular staircase. The air was dank and musty, like the smell of wet blankets, and the massive stone walls were slimy to the touch. Down and down they went, until they arrived at another door, even heavier and stronger looking than the first. A cobweb brushed across Milo's face, and he shuddered.
"You'll find it quite pleasant here,"
chuckled the policeman as he slid the bolt back and pushed the door open with a screech and a squeak.
"Not much company, but you can always chat with the witch."
"The witch?" trembled Milo.
"Yes, she's been here for a long time,"
he said, starting along another corridor. In a few more minutes, they had gone through 3 other doors, across a narrow footbridge, down 2 more corridors, and another stairway, and stood finally in front of a small cell door.
"This is it," said the policeman. "All the comforts of home."
The door opened and then shut, and Milo and Tok found themselves in a high vaulted cell with 2 tiny windows halfway up on the wall.
"See you in 6 million years,"
said Officer Shrift, and the sound of his footsteps grew fainter and fainter until it wasn't heard at all. "It does look serious, doesn't it, Tok?" said Milo very sadly.
"It certainly does,"
the dog replied, sniffing around to see what their new quarters were like. "I don't know what we're gonna do for all that time. We don't even have a checker set or a box of crayons."
"Don't worry,"
growled Tok, raising one paw assuringly.
"Something will turn up. Here, wind me, will you please? I'm beginning to run down."
"You know something, Tok?" he said as he wound up the dog. "You can get in a lot of trouble mixing up words or just not knowing how to spell them. If we ever get out of here, I'm going to make sure to learn all about them." Let's take a pause, because right there we have one of the major themes of this book, and that is that words are important, and it's important to learn words and know what they mean. And Milo is sort of just realizing this, that after everything he's been through, that he says you can get in a lot of trouble mixing up words or just not knowing how to spell them. That is one of the themes of the book stated right there in the text. As we remember, a theme is a universal lesson that is found throughout all stories and shared by all stories. Most stories have more than one theme, and this is definitely one of the Phantom Tollbooth. So Milo is learning a lesson here.
"A very commendable ambition, young man,"
said a small voice from across the cell. Commendable is one of your vocabulary words, and it means worthy of praise. Milo looked up, very surprised, and noticed for the first time in the half light of the room a pleasant-looking old lady, quietly knitting and rocking. "Hello," he said.
"How do you do?"
she replied. "You'd better be very careful," Milo advised. "I understand there's a witch somewhere in here."
"I am she,"
the old lady answered casually, and pulled her shawl a little closer around her shoulders. Milo jumped back in fright and quickly grabbed Tok to make sure that his alarm didn't go off, for he knew how much witches hate loud noises.
"Don't be frightened," she laughed. "I'm not a witch. I'm a witch."
"Oh," said Milo, because he couldn't think of anything else to say.
"I'm faintly Macabre, the not-so-wicked witch," she continued, "and I'm certainly not going to harm you."
"What's a witch?" asked Milo, releasing Tok and stepping a little closer. Okay, let's take a pause and get some information from what we've already read. And that is that Officer Shrift said that this woman is a witch, but she's not. She's actually a witch. So we have homophones going on here. Just like we had the weatherman and the weatherman. And her name is faintly Macabre. Well, macabre is one of your vocabulary definitions, and it basically means gruesome and horrifying, ghastly, or horrible. But her first name is Faintly, and faintly basically means really not a lot, only a little bit. So her name literally means only a little bit gruesome and horrifying, only a little bit horrible. She's Faintly Macabre, and you need to remember that she is a witch, not a witch. Okay, so now we're going to find out why she is a witch, and she's going to tell her entire story. In the next paragraph, though, we're going to find out what her actual job was in Dictionopolis, and you will need to know this for the quiz. So pay attention closely to this next paragraph.
"Well,"
said the old lady, just as a rat scurried across her foot,
"I am the king's great aunt. For years and years, I was in charge of choosing which words were to be used for all occasions, which ones to say and which ones not to say, which ones to write and which ones not to write. As you can well imagine, with all the thousands to choose from, it was a most important and responsible job. I was given the title of official witch, which made me very proud and happy."
So there you have it. Her job is choosing which words people would use for all occasions. Now she's going to continue with the rest of the story of how she ended up in a prison cell. And so I want you to pay attention to sequence of events on this, and then we'll review it at the end.
"At first, I did my best to make sure that only the most proper and fitting words were used. Everything was said clearly and simply, and no words were wasted. I had signs posted all over the palace and marketplace which said, 'Brevity is the soul of wit.' But power corrupts, and soon I grew miserly and chose fewer and fewer words, trying to keep as many as possible for myself."
Now, power corrupts. Somebody who is corrupted has basically turned bad. You can see the definition next to you. It is one of your vocabulary words. Please make sure you know it for the quiz.
I had new signs posted which said, "An ill-chosen word is the fool's messenger." Soon sales began to fall off in the market. The people were afraid to buy as many words as before, and hard times came to the kingdom. But still I grew more and more miserly. Soon there were so few words chosen that hardly anything could be said, and even casual conversation became difficult. Again, I had new signs posted which said, "Speak fitly," or "Be silent wisely." And finally, I had even these replaced by ones which read simply, "Silence is golden." All talk stopped. No words were sold. The marketplace closed down, and the people grew poor and disconsolate. When the king saw what had happened, he became furious and had me cast into this dungeon where you see me now, an older and wiser woman. That was all many years ago, she continued, but they never appointed a new witch, and that explains why today people use as many words as they can and think themselves very wise for doing so. For always remember that, while it is wrong to use too few, it is often far worse to use too many.
And I think that we can call that last line another theme of the story. You'll notice that she says it's wrong to use too few words, but it's also far worse to use too many. And Tak said something similar in a previous chapter where he said only when you use a lot of words to say a little. And even the humbug said that earlier when we first met him, when he said, "A slavish concern for the composition of words is the sign of a bankrupt intellect." All of those things are saying the same theme, which is basically don't use too many words to say what you have to say. Say what you have to say simply. And on that note, let's go back into what the story that Faintly Macabre just told us and look at the 4 lines of text, the signs that she posted throughout the kingdom that made people use less and less words. First of all 4 of the signs that she made are real sayings. They are not made up for the book. They are sayings that have been passed down from generation to generation. And they're all kind of saying the same thing in different ways. But I want to introduce a new word. All of these signs are what are called aphorisms. Aphorism is observation that contains a general truth, such as, if it's not broke, don't fix it. So an aphorism is something that is kind of true, has been proven to be true, generally accepted as true, and it's passed down from generation to generation as something that is taught to people, like, hey, this is a true lesson that you should know. And what is the true lesson that Faintly Macabre is trying to teach the people of Dictionopolis? She becomes miserly with the words. Miserly meaning that she doesn't want to share the words. She becomes overly concerned with people choosing the right words and doesn't trust them to choose the right words, so she decides to keep all the words for herself, and eventually people just decide that they're not going to be bothered and stop speaking altogether. So let's look at these 4 signs that are actually famous aphorisms and try and decode what they're saying and figure out why they're all saying pretty much the same thing. The first one is, brevity is the soul of wit. Well, brevity is one of your vocabulary words, and it means the quality of expressing much in few words. It means saying what you need to say, saying a lot, but in the fewest amount of words possible. That's brevity. And wit is mental sharpness and inventiveness. It's keen intelligence. So what that sign is saying is that the less words you use, the more intelligent you actually are. If you can say what you need to say in as few words as possible, you're pretty intelligent. And that is her way of trying to persuade the people to not use as many words because she wants to keep them for herself. Then the next aphorism that she posts is, an ill-chosen word is the fool's messenger, which basically means that if you say the wrong thing to somebody, that you could end up looking like a fool, or it could get you into trouble or have a consequence that makes you look foolish. And then she says, the third sign, speak fitly or be silent wisely. Well, speak fitly just means speak with as few words as possible. You know, when you're fit, your muscles are nice and tight, so you want your words to be nice and tight and concise. So speak fitly or be silent wisely, meaning if you can't speak correctly and say the right thing the proper way, then the smart thing to do is just to not say anything at all and be silent. So now she's pushing people more and more and more towards silence. And then finally, she gives up and says simply the last sign, silence is golden, which is a very favorite aphorism. It's one of my personal favorites because I happen to believe it wholeheartedly, that silence is golden. Gold is rare. Gold is precious. Well, so is silence, because we are surrounded by a world of noise and traffic and landscapers and devices. It's very rare that we actually get moments of extended silence when we're awake. And so silence is golden, silence is precious. The problem with Faintly Macabre posting these aphorisms is she was keeping all the words for herself, and people eventually just got so paranoid that they didn't speak at all. And that infuriated the king, and that's why she's in prison. Now, I think we're ready to continue. When she had finished, she sighed deeply, patted Milo gently on the shoulder, and began knitting once again. "And have you been down here ever since then?" asked Milo sympathetically.
"Yes," she said sadly. "Most people have forgotten me entirely, or remember me wrongly as a witch, not a witch. But it matters not, it matters not," she went on unhappily, "for they are equally frightened of both."
"Well, I don't think you're frightening," said Milo, and Tok wagged his tail in agreement.
"I thank you very much," said Faintly Macabre. "You may call me Aunt Faintly. Here, have a punctuation mark."
And she held out a box of sugar-coated question marks, periods, commas, and exclamation points.
"That's all I get to eat now."
"Well, when I get out of here, I'm going to help you," Milo declared forcefully.
"That's very nice of you," she replied, "but the only thing that can help me is the return of rhyme and reason."
"The return of what?" asked Milo.
"Rhyme and reason," she repeated. "But that's another long story, and you may not want to hear it."
"We would like to very much," barked Tok. "We really would," agreed Milo, and as the witch rocked slowly back and forth, she told them this story. A story that we will hear when we read Chapter 6 next time.